There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another library book vlog. I love doing these, and some of you enjoy watching them. So here I am with another one, starting it in early August. I'm going to take the rest of the month to finish it up at a leisurely pace and show you hopefully more of Saskatoon than I've shown you before, including later this morning, taking you to the farmer's market, where I have never been, ever. So, looking forward to that. I have 6 books out from the university library that I'm going to feature in this vlog, one more than last time. So here are the books I'm going to be sampling and talking about. The first one is a collection of short stories from a Nova Scotia writer. And except one, all of these books just jumped out at me on the shelf. And unlike most library books, they don't have a whole bunch of library stuff. Like, I'm not ashamed to show you the covers. So here is this short story collection. It's called Rafael Has Pretty Eyes by Elaine McCluskey. I love the title. That's a pretty great cover too, I think. And Elaine McCluskey has written 3 short story collections before. I had never heard of her. She lives in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. One of her collections, or one of her books, she's gotten 5 books. 3 of them must be short stories. I don't know what this is the title of, but one of her books is entitled The Most Heartless Town in Canada. Good. This is the 2022 collection, and the epigraph, which has no source, just the epigraph, is, like, there's no person cited who said this, but somebody said, "Life is just one extended series of anecdotes, strung together until they kill you. In the meantime, there are men named Raphael with pretty eyes, so, you know, it's all worth it in the end." Here is another work of Canadian fiction, A Handbook for Beautiful People. I mean, hello, I needed to sign this out, by Jennifer Spruit. Never heard of her? This is from 2017. She's born in Lloydminster. Lloydminster is a city in Western Canada, in the north of Western Canada. Somewhat north, anyway. Lloydminster is a city in Western Canada that is half on the Saskatchewan side of the border and half on the Alberta side of the border. It's kind of ridiculous, but, you know, welcome to Canada. She was born there, and so it's written, Jennifer Spruit was born in Lloydminster, Alberta/Saskatchewan. Now lives in Courtenay, BC. This is her first novel. Now, as much as I'm appreciative of the fact that the cover is unmarked, I hate that the library would think they needed to do this. Look where they put the barcode. Right in the middle of the thing. I can't read it. Ugh. That's just abuse. The 22-year-old protagonist finds herself unexpectedly pregnant. Oh, it sounds very dramatic. I'm not sure. Very, very dramatic and a very intense story with all kinds of crises. I see something about a prostitute and a character who is deaf and fetal alcohol syndrome and the suicide attempts. Wow. Well, I'll give it a try anyway. Here is an Australian novel. I'd never heard of the author or the book, and I was drawn to the cover. The Home Crowd by Kershaw. From 2002, and Graham Kershaw was born in the UK in 1961 in Lancashire, but has lived in Australia since 1971. He's an architect in Fremantle. This is his first novel. And again, we've got the stupid barcode, but there is a thing in here. So the synopsis says, the protagonist, a man, after having lived in Australia for a decade, returns to his home in the north of England, abandoning friends, career, and a bride-to-be. That sounds like it could be interesting. Doesn't it match my blouse today? Here is another Australian novel, short novel, The Mule's Foal by Fotini Epanomitis. I'll figure out how to pronounce that eventually. I mean, when I'm browsing at the library, all I can see is the spine, but so it was the title and author that grabbed me, and I was in the browsing along the shelf that had Canadian on one side and Australian on the other, and so that's where these all came from. Oh, Fotini Epanomitis is a woman. She was born in 1969 the year that her family migrated from northern Greece to Perth, Australia. This is her debut novel from 1993. The protagonist, Theodosius, abandons his wife and gorilla child. Oh, gorilla child? And spends a lifetime trying to get them back. 1 minute you're a woman, the next you're a bear. Well, I can already tell that I'm not going to like this. Should have read the back before I got it out, but, you know, gonna try it and tell you about it. Maybe one of you would like to read it. And here is a short story collection called Seeds and Other Stories by Ursula. I don't know how to pronounce that. Maybe is the P silent? Pflug. This was published in 2020. She is the author or editor of 10 books, including novels, novellas, and story collections. She lives in Peterborough, Ontario. Peterborough County, Ontario. And finally, this was on the new release section at the University Library, and I recognized it because Lindy featured it on her channel in the past year sometime, and I was quite drawn to what she had to say. So, a collection of essays. The Call of the Red-Winged Blackbird. Essays on the Common and Extraordinary by Tim Bowling. I believe Tim Bowling is an Edmonton writer. Yes, he is. And this sounds lovely. It's nature writing, nature essays. Not necessarily. I mean, maybe not exclusively. This is from 2022. No, it's a mixture of topics. There are essays here about... Well, the one that jumps out at me is one essay is entitled, Should I Really Read the Remains of the Day? In What Remains of My Days? On literary success and growing old. But I know at least some of them are about nature. And I was quite taken with Lindy's review, so I got it out from the library. So those are the 6. Let's see how it goes.
Potatoes and stuff.
Where
do you want to start?
Doesn't matter. I'll follow you.
Well, maybe we'll just start going around.
Yep.
Like that's here more than just the farmer's market.
Okay.
This one here, one of those, and I'll try the pork and bun.
What one?
Also,
Okay, how many?
one of each, eh?
One of each.
Yeah, and one shrimp dumpling.
A tomato or two. Like this is the place to buy tomatoes.
It's okay, you can put it in.
So we should wander over by the highlights to see what they've got before we decide.
Hi.
I would like to try 2 of the Filipino buns.
Filipino.
Yes.
Look, soda.
Okay.
Yeah. So how about pop bun?
Yeah, 2 of those.
Okay.
Lovely. Thank you.
$5 piece.
Hello, I'm back. It's been a while. I've been a little busy and a little bit sick. Nothing too serious, but I'm still not feeling 100%, but life's too short to be sick, so I'm just kind of trying to power through it. This is going to be a quick and dirty check-in on the first book. I have less than an hour to get ready for a bite-sized book chat on Zoom, and then immediately after that get into my parents' car and go out to the farm for 3 nights. and I haven't started packing. So, just finished reading the story and doing my hair. So, but first I have to have a little rant about leaf blower machines. The portable ones, they carry like this astronaut backpack on their backs, and the emergency neon orange vests, and they just go around blowing stuff year round. They blow snow with it. They blow leaves with it. I don't know what the hell he's blowing today, but he's been doing it, or they've been doing it for 3 hours. And it's just I think as I get older, I'm getting more sensitive to noise. It drives me batty, and especially now. What is he blowing? They cut the lawn, and so he's blowing the grass. Where is he blowing it? I mean, it's just going to blow somewhere else after he's done, and it's been going on for hours, so you're probably going to hear it in the background. One of my biggest pet peeves about living here is that the machine. Why do they need those machines? Get rid of them or make them quiet. Anyhow, I'm happy to report that I loved this first story. The story collection is called Rafael Has Pretty Eyes by Elaine McCluskey, and she is an Atlantic Canadian writer who I'd never heard of. Lives in Dartmouth. And this is a very funny story. And I'd say it's more comical than anything else, but it did have some had very well done characters and a bit of pathos. First of all, the title. It's Never What You Think It Will Be. And it's about bad luck. Now here's something that I often get waylaid by. When it's a first-person fictional narrative by a female writer, I always automatically assume that the protagonist is female, and vice versa with a male writer. And that isn't always true, and it wasn't true in this story. So I got about 6 pages in before I realized that the person speaking, who's about 30, is a man. So he and his roommate, and they're just roommates, there's nothing gay about this story, but the fact that they're around 30 and are roommates is a commentary on what sad sacks they've become. But they're at his mother's, at a toast and roast, which maybe is an Atlantic Canadian thing. Tell me where you live if you've ever heard of a toast and roast. But I know what a roast is, but this is a roast for somebody who's not famous. That's the part that's kind of confusing for me. And it is the protagonist's mother's fourth husband. So she hasn't been very lucky in love. Here's the opening 2 sentences. I am at a toast and roast for my mother's fourth husband, Wayne. Wayne, of course, is a dud. Who else do you get on the 4th attempt? Idris Elba? Her previous husbands have been, this is Wayne, the previous one was Dwayne, and the one before that was Blaine. I don't know what the protagonist's father's name was. So they're there, they're not really having a good time, and they're kind of down on their luck, but fascinating characters. In fact, Cedric, his roommate, is more fully fleshed out in some ways than the first-person protagonist. He is an illustrator, and he is weeks, if not months, late on getting illustrations for a children's book to the publisher. And he's got some mental health struggles, and he's a bit of a daydreamer. These two, both of who have been unlucky in love, well, I'll read you this. This will be the last thing I read from this story, but this is Cedric, the roommate. Cedric is a ridiculously talented artist. He is also bipolar. Sometimes Cedric decides to do sick things, and I go along with him, thinking I'm being a good friend. And I think that's the modern slang meaning of sick, which means fantastic, cool, I think. I'm not sure. And then, after a $600 flight to LA to watch the turtle races at Brennan's pub, he becomes depressed. They have the kind of friendship where, on a whim, they'll get on a $600 flight to LA to watch turtle racing, and then Cedric will be depressed afterwards because it was boring and regret not going to Tokyo for something else. So yeah, a bit of a dreamer, and the toast and roast is disgusting. All of Wayne, our protagonist's new stepfather. Oh, I guess our protagonist's name is Michael. The first person narrator I've just seen is Michael. So Michael's new stepdad is a dud. He didn't expect anything less. All of his friends are duds. One of them is an elected politician, and there's campaign posters all over, and The jokes are awful and sexist, and these two young men are just rolling their eyes. But the last thing I'll say about the story is that it really hinges on bad luck and has a quite shocking ending that I'm obviously not going to tell you about, that ties up that theme rather dramatically. I really enjoyed it. I mean, it wasn't a Sean story in the sense that I wasn't moved by anything, but it was very entertaining. The character work. It was a Sean story in the fact that the writing was really good and the character work was very subtle. So I think I have to read the entire collection. I don't have time to do that anytime soon, but I certainly, on the basis of the very first story, recommend that you check out Rafael Has Pretty Eyes by Elaine McCluskey. Holy smokes! Well, we've seen everything now, I think.
Yeah, going there with it.
Kershaw? Teddy's here, Reg. Remember Teddy?
Yeah?
He's here.
I'll bring him out.
Yeah, it's not bad.
He's not even in bad shape.
All right, well, here I am out at the farm. I think it's my second full day, maybe. I'm not sure. I lose track of time when I'm out here. But having a lovely, relaxing time. And I've had a dickens of a time posting videos. So I was able to post the zooming in video with Mikiko. It took all night, overnight. A 22-minute video. That took all night to post. And then my Friday Reads video, I started uploading it at 6:30 p.m. Friday night. And it finally finished posting. There's more chapters to this story that I'm not going to bore you with. But I was finally able to post it. I was finally able to publish it 36 hours later. To put it mildly, that was really irksome. So, my Friday Reads is up on Sunday morning, and I'm not going to try and post anything else until I get back to the city on Monday. It's now later Sunday morning, so there you go. So, I came out on Thursday. This is my third day here. Probably the most exciting thing that's happened is, and Mum basically lured me out to the farm because there's two houses on the farm. Years ago, I did a vlog, or I did a video just showing you the farm. So that's really old. That's from, I don't know how many years ago, 6 years ago, almost. Mom and Dad live in the big house, which was my grandparents' house, which is where my dad grew up from the age of about 9. And he still lives here. And then after my parents got married, they built a bungalow house just over there, where they started their married life and where I grew up until I was about 14, I think, at which point we moved into the big house. So, the reason I'm telling you all this is that the bungalow, we have rented it. It's more complicated than just using the verb rent, but we're not going to get into all that. We rented it to a neighbor boy. He was very young when he first moved in, maybe 22 or something, who my dad does a lot of farming with, that family. And our families have known each other going way back into the generations. And he's lived there for 10 years, I believe. So we had a bunch of stuff stored there in the basement. I had a bunch of stuff stored there in the basement. And we never ever went into that house for a decade. That young man brought over something like 10 boxes of books. And so many years ago, I made videos about books that were in a box somewhere in Canada. And there was about 10 boxes, and I showed them all to you. And they're now all upstairs here. And I'm slowly integrating them into my library in Saskatoon. But there was a whole bunch of other stuff over there. And, you know, it was his house while he was staying here. And we just never ever went in. So now we have free access. And we have found a treasure trove of stuff that we kind of forgotten if we had it or where it was, including 2 pieces of art that I lost track of after I left Vancouver and moved to Japan in 2009, that I was quite sure was somewhere on this farm, but we didn't know where and wondered what the heck could have happened to it. Well, found both of those pieces of art, and I'm going to show those to you as part of this vlog, so stay tuned for that. We also found a closet door that I think was in the bedroom or maybe even in the living room when we were growing up, that Mom and Dad used to mark how tall my sister and I were at various years. I think most families had something like that. And the other thing that I really wanted to find and wasn't sure I'd ever find, I wondered if it just got lost in the shuffle, was 2 pieces of furniture that belonged to my birth mother. So not my mom who raised me, who you've met many times on my channel, but my birth mom. I never got a chance to meet her. She died very young from a severe diabetes and complications of diabetes in the early 90s. But from her family, as in memory of her, as something to have of hers, I was given a mirror that she looked into every day. Beautiful from Danish furniture, Danish mirror, Danish style furniture, whatever. And also an armchair that I used as my desk chair in Vancouver for years. And had never found those again after all that happened and all the moving across the world and whatnot. So those were over at the other house. All right. Since I've been at the farm, I have previewed this Western Canadian novel, A Handbook for Beautiful People by Jennifer Spruit. And I am quite impressed with what I've read. I've read maybe 15 pages, 10 or 15 pages. I've read the first chapter. This is the 2017 novel, and I know I've already told you that this is a debut novel, and that Jennifer Spruit was born in Lloydminster, which is on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border, now lives in Courtenay, BC. This is very impressive. I'll tell you, I'm not sure that I would read it all the way to the end, because I think it's going to end up being quite a tough story with a lot of street people. And the only issue I might have with that is that the stories might be so rough that it might be hard. There was some incidents in the first chapter that were disturbing to read. But that is not a good enough reason not to read a book, especially with all the other things that I really liked. That's just a little tag for me that might do me in with this book. And I know that what I've just said is something probably that I need to go away and think about, but there's a lot of crime and violence and addiction already in the story. There are a whole bunch of other characters. Our protagonist is a 22-year-old waitress named Marla, and she has a rich, much more well-to-do boyfriend, Liam, and she has a roommate, Danny, a female, who lives in her basement of her house that is trying to get her act together and recover from drug addiction. The relationship between Marla and Liam was really vividly described, and their personalities just jumped off the page. So the character work is already drawing me into the story. There's quite a bit of humor here. The writing is really rich. It doesn't read like a debut. There's a couple things. I can't remember what they are, but I thought, oh yeah, well, this is a debut. But for the most part, it's really, really impressive. Marla is she's kind of impish, and I'm really drawn to her character. Her boyfriend Liam, what is he? Well, he used to be a cellist, but now he's I think a lawyer, something like that. And he's a bit of a stick in the mud, and the dynamic between them is quite interesting. But Marla herself has already really gotten my attention. So I don't know why it's called a handbook for beautiful people. The main character and her boyfriend sound like are described as being very beautiful people. There's a lot of down and out characters as well, some of whom were just kind of thrown at me in the opening chapter without any context. I don't know who they are or how important they're going to become with a kind of an act of violence perpetrated by perhaps a street person or a homeless person, and it made me uncomfortable just because it's like, is this going to be a main character, and am I going to have to read a whole bunch more of these kinds of violent incidents? I hope not. But anyway, what a confident, intriguing first chapter that was. Let me show you the one of the pieces of art that I've found. It was hanging on the wall in the other house. I was sure it was in a closet somewhere, but somebody hung it up, and none of us ever thought to look. We actually almost gave up looking for it, and just Mom and I went back into the house one more time because she said, there's another cupboard in the old den. Did you look in there? And I didn't, and there was some interesting stuff in there. And then Mom noticed it on the wall in what used to be our den. So here it is. Okay, it's going to be hard to show this without glare when it's outside, but there we go. This is as close to an original Keith Haring as I own, or as I would ever in my wildest dreams be able to afford to own. That is a postcard of a Keith Haring mural or whatever that he did on the side of a building, and you can see there he is in the photo, and then he has signed the postcard. So that's an original signature, if I can believe it is. On the basis of believing that it was, I paid $100 for that postcard 20 years ago on eBay, and then paid far more than that to get it beautifully framed. Well, there is my most treasured piece of Keith Haring art. I have dozens of framed prints of his on the wall, nothing original, nothing that's worth anything, although I suppose some of the prints, if they've gone out of print, might be worth a penny or two, but this, if it is authentic, and I have no reason to believe that it isn't, is something that, and even if it's just that I think it is, I treasure it as a beautiful thing to hang on my wall, and missing for 15 or so years, and now I have it back on it's going up on my wall in Saskatoon as soon as I get back to the city. I just think it's gorgeous.
Well, Sean, beats and beats. Beats and beats and beats. There's beets. Oh, you can pull it. They're sure big, aren't they? They'll make good borscht too. Oh my.
Hello, well, I am back in the city, and it's a beautiful late afternoon on Wednesday, heading to the branch library, pick up a book. Thought I'd take you with me, and I hadn't been out of the house all day. Check the mail. I've got a delivery from Blackwell's. Let's see what it is, shall we? Let's do a mini book haul. Oh, yes. I don't remember how I found out about this. Maybe on Twitter. Seemed like such a Sean book. It's called Cheri by Joanne Beard. Look at that cover. It's just out from Profile Books, Ltd. Oh, Serpent's Tail. Okay. I believe it's a novella about a woman who is dying of cancer in the final weeks of her life. That sounds like a Sean book to the max, and I forget what I heard about it that made me so curious. It wasn't just a cover by, but look at that cover. As I was walking here, I was listening to the middle bit of one of my newest, most favorite bookish podcasts. It's called the Book Club Podcast. Its title is, the name of the podcast is so similar to the Bookcast Club. It is the Book Club Review Podcast. The Book Club Review Podcast. And one of the co-hosts, Kate, has been very friendly with me over the last year or so, and I have finally summoned up the courage to actually make personal contact with her, and she's agreed to come on my channel, probably to start on Zooming In, so stay tuned for that. But I just love that podcast. In this episode, she's talking about summer reads, and she's visiting a new trendy bookstore in London and talking about summer reading with the very smart, very articulate, very lovely sounding owner or person who works at that bookstore. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's absolutely delightful. I can't recommend that podcast more highly. I am here to check in on this Australian novel, but so far I don't think it's set in Australia, which I'm not going to penalize it for. Graham Kershaw's The Home Crowd, published in 2002. The protagonist at the opening of the story has returned to England for a visit, perhaps. I think it's just for a visit. After living in Australia with a decade, leaving his fiancée back in, I forget which part of Australia. I'm sorry, I'm not Australian. It went right, I think near Perth, perhaps. It seems like the bulk, if not the entirety of this story is going to happen on his return visit to where his people come from, where he came from. Yorkshire, and in particular, West Yorkshire. And he arrives at the nearest bus stop. I think he's bedraggled. It's a rainy day, and he has to walk a mile to his uncle's derelict farmyard. And his uncle is actually his maternal aunt's husband. The maternal aunt has died, and so has this main character's mother died. But there seems that there was some terrible falling out between the two families, and the uncle is gruff, alcoholic, but he can't help at least being kind on the most rudimentary level, however begrudgingly. And so the exchange between them, that his first night there and maybe the next day, was all covered in the first chapter. But he gets particularly ornery and shuts right down when our protagonist tries to push him for more details about why he and his wife didn't come to Australia during the protagonist's mother's final illness or after she died for the funeral, and the uncle gets really angry about that, and that's the end of that conversation. So I don't know where the story's going, but it's so vivid. The setting is so beautifully described. I love the Yorkshire dialect. It's not too thick to be, I'm not having to Google expressions very often. I think I looked up one or two in 20 pages, but it's just a very visceral language. The dialogue and the description, I am deeply impressed by it. I will skim it a little bit more before I take it back to the library to see if more of the story happens in Australia, in which case I might try to sneak it in for Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plots Australian Readathon in September. What's this called? What? Straya September. But I'm pretty booked up for what I want to read for then. But this one could be a late addition if more of the story actually happens in Australia. However, this is a book that I will definitely return to and read when the time is right, because I was more than impressed with the opening chapter. All right, I'm going to take you to the library. Let's go see what's on the new release shelf, shall we? You don't have to say anything, just wave.
Just wave. Don't say anything.
There you go. All right, it's been a few days. Don't have much to tell you, but I will check in on Seeds and Other Stories by Ursula Pflug. This one was I don't know. I didn't get very far. I only read a couple pages. They're magical stories, so too much magical realism or something like that, I didn't care for it. I tried to read Mother Down the Well, and I thought the writing was really good, but it was so magic. It was read kind of like a fairy tale, and I just messages on tablets in the pond and prophecies and stuff, and it's like, no, this is not for me. So might be for you. I thought the writing was really good, so look it up and do a Kindle preview or something, because you may like it, but I didn't.
books I wanted to look at that were in there. $0.50. So I gave him $1. I felt really cheap. $3, $4, $3.
Well, hello there. Long time no see. My health issues got in the way, and this just got sidetracked for all these months. So I'm glad to be now feeling better again. And let's quickly finish this up. I don't know that it's now winter, although there's no snow, but it's hovering around +5 Celsius here. I don't imagine I'm going to get out anywhere to give you any more footage of anything. So let's just finish up, shall we? I have now, just an hour ago, read the first couple short chapters of this novella, The Mule's Foal by Fotini Epanomitis. Don't know how it's pronounced, couldn't find any help online. It's the only book this writer has published. It's not a Sean book, but boy, it was well written. It almost made me want to it did make me want to read a few more chapters, actually. It might be a book that I would try someday, because it's so well done. But yeah, it opens in an old village, seems to be like perhaps on the Greek-Turkish border. Is there a border between Greece and Turkey? I don't know, but half the town are Greek old people and half the town are Turkish old people. My geography's not up to par, so is there a border? Anyway. And there's hardly anybody left in the town. All the young people have moved away. And then what few old people are still there, we get a little sense of the families they came from, and then in the second chapter we go back decades and decades to when these people were young, and the young girl, who is the shriveled old woman in the first part, was a not very attractive young girl, and she looked horny. The word horny is not used here, but her face betrayed a longing look. It was a longing that no one talked about, but all the villagers saw it on her face. They said it was shameful for an unmarried girl to walk around with a face like that. So they marry her off to this young man. He's not very attractive. They get married. Everybody's happy, but the horny look or the longing look on the young woman doesn't go away. And it turns out that her new husband doesn't ever sleep. Maybe the first night, but after that sleeps back at his parents' house. But nonetheless, she gets pregnant, don't know how or by whom, and gives birth to a gorilla. And I said that when I read the back in the introduction, that sounded like a book I didn't want to read, and I'm still of that opinion. But there's a lively kind of mythic quality to the prose, and I thought, it's kind of interesting, but I can't stand books about humans that give birth to animals. It's just one of the most uninteresting plot lines in all of literary history. So if you disagree with me, this might be a book you want to try. And I still do, in spite of how much I hate that storyline, I'm still curious to see what happens next. So, those are my thoughts. One more book to go. Stay tuned. Hey, so this is the Nelson Mandela picture. This is the other piece of artwork that I found at the farm in the basement of the bungalow house. And I got this off of eBay. Oh, goodness. Sometime in the early 2000s, I think. And it's a very special, it's a very beautiful portrait of Mandela with, I think, a dove. And it's assigned and numbered. There's the numbering. And is that Aleta, Aneta, Michelatos? Let's look at the back. It's commissioned by some aspect of the United Nations, World Federation of United Nations Associations, in 1994 to commemorate. Wasn't that the year of the election? I believe it was. And the author is Aleta Michelatos from South Africa. And each print is hand-signed by the artist. And there's a long description there. So let's put this back up. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, Nelson Mandela, for many years, if not decades, I would describe him as my hero. I think I still would. I think in the light of, in retrospect, perhaps now there's a critique to be made of his choices he made politically or whatever, and I'm interested to a certain degree to learn about that. But certainly the man was and is inspiring, and I'm delighted to have this print on my wall, and I did pay quite a bit of money to get it gorgeously framed at the time. I love it. So there you go. All right, so this is the first time I've ever tried to film a video here under my new Mandela, my new old Mandela picture. I think the lighting is terrible, so probably never do this again. But to quickly finish up, I have read 2 essays out of this collection. The Call of the Red-Winged Blackbird by Tim Bowling, and I loved them both, especially the first one. The first one is called On the Rails, and it is one of the most delightful personal essays I've read in a long time. It is about the author's fascination with railroads, but in particular his lifelong fascination with the silent film star Buster Keaton, who I knew next to nothing about, and I Googled him and, you know, kind of got up to speed on who he was and what he did to understand this essay better, and that didn't take me very long. What an incredible essay. So the connection is that Buster Keaton, at the end of his life, like literally a year maybe before he died, as a old drunk that in a certain sense you could say humiliated himself by in old age after being completely forgotten for decades, took on any bit part in any movie in the 60s or 50s or 60s that he could get. It's kind of like Mae West Sextet, kind of that kind of a thing. He was hired by the National Film Board in Canada to do a silent film traveling across Canada from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast by rail, what is it called, handcart? Let me look that up. Yeah, by a mechanized railway handcart. And he was just to play himself. The premise was that he saw an ad in the UK, in a UK newspaper, to travel Canada, so he swims across the Atlantic, comes up on the shore, bedraggled, and finds one of these railway handcarts and proceeds to travel across Canada. And so it's a tribute to his silent film star days, and also a mockumentary about the natural beauty of Canada. And I'd never heard of it. Buster Keaton, of course, was not Canadian. I don't know if he was British, actually. I think he was American, but he may have been born in Britain. Anyway, not only is there this 25-minute mockumentary or NFB film, it's called The Railrodder from 1965, but they also made a documentary about the making of the movie. Both of those are available for free on YouTube, so you can look those up. And it was just absolutely fascinating and a really quite moving portrait of Buster Keaton, who I didn't know very much about. Just beautifully written. So this is the first thing I've read by Tim Bowling. Then I read the one that caught my eye. Should I really read The Remains of the Day in What Remains of My Days? And it was a short essay about rereading. He quotes D.H. Lawrence, who says, after you've written your first draft, you should burn it and then write a second draft. Not refer to the first draft because you've just burned it and write your book. And apparently that was D.H. Lawrence's modus operandi. And then he also quotes that old poop Robertson Davies, who said, you should read great works of literature 3 times. As a young person, he probably said young man because he was such a sexist old poop. And in middle age, and then when you're elderly, and you will have a completely different experience. I think that's probably true. He uses that as a jumping off point for him in the early days of the internet, being able to finally obtain a copy of a really, not a literary masterpiece, but a childhood novel for boys that he read, I think, in the early 70s, called Homer Pickle, and reread it and wrote about the experience because he didn't like it as an adult. It was horrifically racist, not to mention didactic. But all he remembered about his youthful enjoyment of it was the heroics of it, the athletic prowess of the protagonist, and hadn't noticed any of the other stuff, and noticed all that, obviously, big time as an adult. And so he kind of concludes that probably Robertson Davies is right. Even lesser forms of literature, books that you probably think you aren't going to like, it's still interesting to reread them and see how you've changed, how you've matured. So yeah, it was interesting, but he doesn't really talk about The Remains of the Day. He just kind of uses it as a cute title. So I enjoyed that one, but not as much as the first one, and am really excited to continue with this, but I just don't have time to continue with it right now. But this will be the first one that I pick up again. I have to return these books to the library. The other one that was such a great success was this short story collection, Rafael Has Pretty Eyes, by Elaine McCluskey. So the two Canadian writers, well, I guess almost all of them were Canadian writers, but those two in particular would be the winners of this contest, if that's what it was, and this was extended over almost half of the year. Thanks for watching.